I'm going to invite Dr. Erik Thoennes to come on up, and as he comes up, I want you to give him a big warm welcome, okay?
Thank you.
It's good to have you back with us, Dr. Thoennes, along with your daughter, Paige.
Yes.
She's one of your 4 children, and we've had both you and Paige as a part of our weekend experience. So just to kick us off, Alex chose a lot of songs that are really leading us into this first topic.
So good.
Yeah, not accidental, right? Yeah, very providential.
So good.
And so the whole idea about God being our creator and, even one of our podcasts that Jason had is just the whole faith and science issue. Why is it important for us to believe that God is the creator, that we were made in his likeness, as opposed to why not evolution? Why not some other worldview about origins?
Right. Well, I was thinking about that last song as we were singing. You and I were made to worship. There is so much loaded in just that one sentence. Loaded into that is the assumption that we were made for something at all. If we are just the product of random, chaotic chance that evolution assumes, that it's just this process that isn't driven with any divine intent, well, it's actually nonsense to talk about what we were made for. And I know of no human desire more deeply held than the desire to know my life matters, that we have meaning, we have purpose. And if there isn't divine intention in creation, we don't have that, and we need to give it up. And it's the rare philosopher or thinker that admits that, because we so desperately want to know our lives matter and mean something. But if we don't have a God who creates us for worship, for all the things we were just singing we were made for, then we don't have any transcendent meaning. We can't seek to know that our lives really matter in any significant way. And so I don't think without a God who created us, we can have answers to the deepest questions of life and fulfillment of our deepest desires.
Okay, so a lot of it goes back to having purpose and meaning, direction, where our life really does amount to something. And how can we decide if we're living well if we don't know what we're living for? And the only way to know what we're living for is to know what we were created for, and if we were created for something. Otherwise, it really can be survival of the fittest. And I actually don't know why we have a basis for a lot of the values people hold who don't even believe in God, like you shouldn't be a racist, and you should be kind to people, and you should be respectful, and you should love people. Says who? Survival of the fittest doesn't say that. And a few honest philosophers like Nietzsche, who don't believe in a creator God like we do, he says, the Christian ethic of turn the other cheek and love your enemy is nonsense. And so without an assumption of God who created us for worshiping him, you and I were made to worship. You can't put it better than that. And then everything that follows from that, apart from that, we will have the chaos that we are seeing more and more in our society. Okay. Well, one thing you shared earlier, you have 4 children and you have 4 teenagers. So the oldest is 19, youngest is 13. And as you think about your own children, 2 boys and 2 girls, and your desire for them to live a meaningful, impactful life, and you look out at the crowd this evening, we have students, we have young adults, we have older adults of all ages. How can your kids, as well as us, live that kind of purposeful, meaningful life?
Sometimes I think almost my whole job as a parent is to help my children understand who they are from God's perspective. And not from the world's perspective, not from Hollywood's perspective, not from their friends at school's perspective, not from social media's perspective, but from God's perspective. If I can get my kids to really understand, internalize, and then live out what God views them as, fearfully and wonderfully made, knitted together in their mother's womb, held in his hands in every second of every day of their lives for a glorious purpose of glorifying him, well, I think everything else will fall into place. And sometimes I think we can fall into behavior management and living these moral, ethical lives without a connection to God, and we're missing the main point then. And those things end up being hollow and very short termed.
Okay, great. So originally from Connecticut.
Yes.
Studied your graduate studies at Trinity Evangelical Divinity.
Yes, and
outside of Chicago.
Wheaton
College
yeah.
also. And you've been at Biola for how long now?
20 years.
20 years. Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So why do you wake up and teach the students at Biola? What motivates you?
Well, I teach a course called Theology 1, which is the doctrine of God, humanity, sin, and Christ. And I teach an upper division elective called the character of God. My wife and I teach a class. We have taught a class together called Christian Perspectives on Relationships and Marriage. And so I think that I'm helping students think about the most important things of life, the best answers to the biggest questions of life, and the solutions to the biggest problems of life. And so I really do believe every time I walk in the classroom, I'm doing divorce prevention, I'm doing pornography slaying, real daily practical things are being transformed and affected by what happens. And we talk about the stuff of life, the stuff of our hope, the things that will get us through the greatest challenges of life. I begin every class I've taught with singing "Be Thou My Vision." And when we get to the line, "Whatever befalls, still be my vision, O ruler of all," that's what I want for my students, that no matter what happens in their lives, great difficulty, great joys and ease, whatever it is, that God will be their vision. And if that's the case, everything else will be right.
Okay, that's great. Well, one more question.
Yeah.
When you think about opportunities like this weekend, and it's a way to connect and reconnect, and we think of all of us here, and some of us can't remember when we started going to church. We just grew up in church.
Right.
And we could take the Bible for granted, take songs of worship for granted. How do we maintain not only a freshness in our approach with God, but also where we don't lose that sense of wonder for who we are in Christ?
Yeah, I think it is a daily pursuit of beholding the glory of God in the face of Christ. And so when we wake up with 1,000 things that are flooding our minds, at the center of it all has got to be knowing who God is in the face of Christ. And beholding His glory, not just knowing things about Him, but seeing who He is in the Scriptures, in the context of the fellowship of the saints, as the Spirit works, being transformed by the Word of God to see God for who He is. I believe that we are going to this weekend, and every time we open the Word, able to grow and be changed and behold the glory of God. My prayer is that tonight we all will behold the glory of God more clearly as we think of Him as Creator, and leave here changed. I really believe that happens, and I pray for that, and I see it happen over and over again, which is why I love to do this. And I love to sit under the preaching of the Word, and I love to grow in my understanding of who God is, because we are being changed from one degree of glory to another as we behold the glory of God. It's really cool to be a Christian, for 50 years now, and see massive change in my appreciation for God and everything else. And what that does is it puts idols in perspective. Do you know, there are sins I used to really struggle with that not only I don't struggle with anymore, I can't believe I ever did. And that's because I see God more clearly, and things that would ever compete with Him for my affections seem like more and more of a ridiculous, nonsensical idol. And so it's great to really have made progress and be getting a glimpse of heaven and increasing freedom from sin in light of seeing God for who He is. And so I'm a better husband and father and pastor and professor because I see God for who He is. And I think whatever it is God has us doing, that will be wonderfully enhanced when we dive into His Word together and the Spirit works.
All right. Well, thanks again for being so gracious to come back, and
so welcome.
Look forward to the weekend together.
Thank you.
All right,
thanks, brother. Yay. All right. This is so great. Well, it's so good to be back. I love this church and have loved all our time here at a men's retreat, this event a few years ago, 3 years ago, I think. And we just love this church. And I told Paige I said, Paige, you want to go with me this weekend? And she said, where are you going? And I said, Bread of Life. She said, Bread of Life, I'm going. She couldn't wait to get back here. And I said, boy, you're excited. And she said, I need to be with my Asian people. That's what she said. She's threatened to make this her church ever since she came for the first time. So as long as by the time she's 18, she'll probably be here. That's the feeling I get. But when she makes those decisions for herself. But it really is good to be back. And I may have shown this photograph last time, but I always want to begin anytime I go anywhere but my church to speak and just right away declare, this isn't my whole church. These are a few of the people in our church who work at our food bank and feed about 200 families a week of groceries a week. Paige is faithfully serving there. You can see Paige in the second row, about a little in from your right. And so this is just a little glimpse of the people in our church. And I just want to say right off the bat that I come here not as some speaker, but as a member of Grace Evangelical Free Church of La Mirada and as one of the pastors there, and I come under their authority. I come with their blessing. I come with their prayer. They know I'm here. We have a membership class going on tonight that I'm not at because I want to be here, and our elders want me to be here as well, and our congregation loves that we get to have fellowship with other churches as well. This is the family that I live with on a daily basis. We adopted our kids, the first three from Taiwan, and then Isaac from China. So we have some geopolitical issues going on in our own family. But Caroline's on the left. She's beautifully 19. My wife Donna, of 30 years as of January, is standing next to me. And then, of course, Paige there in the middle in all her glory. And Sam is the taller of the two boys. He just turned 14 on Tuesday. And then Isaac is the younger boy there next to Paige. And they are a delightful family. I just love my family that I get to be their dad and husband. And I come representing them as well. And I like to show these photographs because I so want people I teach to know that I am a disciple working out the things we're going to be talking about in my life as a follower of Jesus, as a husband, as a father, as a pastor, as a prof. And I'm right in this with all of you, trying to know God better, trying to overcome the sin in my life that I battle every day, trying to grow in holiness and in faithfulness to Him. And so we're all in this together, and we're all working this out in the context of our lives that God has us in. Well, I want to talk this weekend about the story of the Bible. I am deeply burdened that we Christians become whole Bible saturated men and women. I think it's one of the greatest needs of the church. I remember when I was a kid, we had this little plastic loaf of bread on the kitchen table. And in the little plastic loaf of bread was our daily bread. It was our verse of the day, and we would pull a little card out with the verse of the day. It was a stack of cards in this little plastic loaf of bread, and we would pull this little verse out, and we would read it, and it would be some sort of promise for the day. It was never a promise like those who seek to be godly in Christ Jesus will be persecuted. It wasn't those sorts of verses, but it was encouraging verses for the day. And I never thought about it at the time, but that approach to the Bible, as helpful as it may be, could actually also lead us astray in the way we think about the Bible. I'm not sure I can think of many other books that we reduce to sentences independent of what surrounds those sentences and the chapters that they're in and the chapters that surround them as we do the Bible. I'm thankful for chapters and verses that were added much later after the original manuscripts were inspired, but I'm not always sure they've been helpful. They sure help you find places in the Bible, but sometimes they make you think there are all these disconnected verses that don't necessarily have anything to do with what's around them. And it is vital for us to see the Bible as a wonderful story that God has told us about Him and about who we are and about what it means to know Him. And so understanding the Bible verses that we read in light of all that is around those verses and the books they're in and where those books of the Bible fit within the grand scheme of the story of redemption we find in the Bible is incredibly important. And so as thankful as I am for little Bible verse daily breads and concordances that help us do these word studies, sometimes I think we're missing the forest for the trees far too often. And we don't understand the forest or the trees as a result. And we can see it quite often with verses often being dragged out of their context, kicking and screaming, often used to mean something they were never meant to mean. And there are lots of examples I could use, but there's one I want you to think about. This one, be still and know that I'm God. The verse used for every other women's retreat that's ever been. Why? Because women are very busy typically. They have a lot on their plates. It's easy for them with 1,000 different plates they have spinning, from children to business to finance. It's just incredible the things women do, and they need peace in their souls. And so this verse sounds so helpful to a busy, frantic woman when she goes on her retreat. And believe me, I want my wife and all the women I know to have peace in their souls. But I want them to get to that peace in the best possible way. This verse from Psalm 46 is often used greatly out of context. I see it all the time on little plaques and framed things. And I know I'm treading on thin ice here and maybe stepping on toes. Some of you might have this in your kitchen right now. And it's okay. I'm not telling you you need to take it down. Some of you may have quoted this to your friends many times. Be still and know that He is God. Have a settledness of soul. Contemplate who He is and have a settledness of soul. And it seems like that's what it's saying. So why not use it that way? Well, actually, that's not what it's saying. Let me show you what it's saying. It's quite amazing. Come behold the works of the Lord, how He has brought desolations on the earth. He makes wars cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the chariots with fire. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted among the earth. God is speaking in this. And who is He speaking to? A lady on a women's retreat, sitting by a babbling brook? No. He is shouting to the warring armies of the earth, saying, shut up. That be still there is not an inner peace of soul. It's a big shut up to the warring armies of the earth. I'm done with this war that you human beings have been doing since Cain and Abel. I'm done with it. I'm ending it right now. It's talking about the future coming of the judge of all the earth, who will put an end to warfare once and for all. And so when you understand that verse, be still and know that I'm God, as God saying to the warring armies, knock it off. It's very different than we tend to think about this verse. Look at Isaac Watts in his great hymn that he wrote, inspired by Psalm 46. I think he understood it properly. From sea to sea through all their shores, he makes the noise of battle cease. When from on high his thunder roars, he awes the trembling world to peace. He breaks the bow, he cuts the spear. Chariots he burns with heavenly flame. Keep silence all the earth and hear the sound and glory of his name. Be still and learn that I am God, exalted over all the lands. I will be known and feared abroad, for still my throne in Zion stands. I think Isaac Watts understood that verse in its proper context when he wrote this hymn. So rather than a babbling brook or a peaceful little pond that you contemplate who God is and have peace in your soul, I think a far better thing to frame and put on your wall would be something a little more like this. I think that's a much more accurate picture of what the verse is actually saying. Not this. This. The warfare's done. God has brought final judgment on all this human sin and warfare. Now, here's the cool thing about this, friends. You actually don't have to sacrifice this. You just get to it through this. Which is way better than just say, no, just think about God, meditate on God. No, think about God as so powerful and so in charge and so in control and so sovereign that even the most powerful armies of the entire earth need to listen to him when he says, shut up. Now, if I call that God Father, I can have stillness of soul. Right? I get to it anyway, right? I don't sacrifice what we tend to use the verse for. I just get there in an incredibly God-focused, God-centered, God-glorifying way that actually gives me a much more robust settledness of soul because it's grounded in a powerful picture of the glory of God and his power and sovereignty rather than just trying to meditate to the point where my soul settles down. And see, we don't want to sacrifice the great and grand and glorious picture of God the Bible gives us in a self-focused way that actually doesn't give us what he wants most for us, which is a settledness of soul that comes through knowing God in all his glory. And so this is just one example of many, many, many passages we could give. We need to constantly be saying, okay, that verse sounds interesting and good, and I can see how you're getting that. But if we back up and see what it says in its context, and not only in the context of, say, Psalm 46, but the particular Psalms it's a part of, or the book of Psalms in general, or where in redemptive history this event is happening, pointing us here in this example to the end of days, to Judgment Day. Did you know that be still and know that I'm God is a Judgment Day verse? It's a day when it's all going to come to its glorious conclusion. It actually is flooded with more meaning than we typically give it when you see it that way. And so my goal this weekend is to help us see the big story of the Bible better, so then all the component parts of the Bible make more sense and fit into place, and we won't be so disoriented and often confused and often unable to answer questions that people ask us when they read things, say, in Leviticus, and wonder how in the world that squares with the God of the New Testament, right? You hear things like, oh, you think homosexuality is wrong? Do you eat shellfish? Because the Bible says that's wrong too. And we say, oh, I'll get back to you on that one. Because we're not able to say, well, let's talk Old Covenant. Let's talk New Covenant. Let's talk about the law being fulfilled in Jesus and the laws that we still practice as believers, but in a very different way in the New Covenant. And we've got an understanding of where verses are in the Bible and how we're to understand them then in light of what they are. And so to get the big story of the Bible down is so incredibly important. All right. This is this is about the size of my typical classes at Biola. So this is wonderful. Let's pause right now. Any comments or questions about anything we've said so far? Any thoughts, comments, questions? Anything? Anything at all? I'm a teacher. I'm completely comfortable with silence. I love it. Often the best questions come after like 45 seconds of nothing. All right, we'll keep your questions written down. We'll think about them. So, where do we begin our story that we understand everything in light of? Well, we begin where the Bible begins. Would you open your Bibles to Genesis chapter 1? Genesis chapter 1 begins where we need to begin, in the beginning. If we get this story right, everything else falls into place. Calvin in the Institutes begins by talking about what he calls double knowledge. Double knowledge is knowledge of God and knowledge of ourselves. Calvin says they work together. And if you read the Institutes, which I highly encourage you to read, people are intimidated by books like that, but they're not as hard as you tend to think they are to read. You may have to get your dictionary out, but that's good, right? So Calvin writes about double knowledge. He says that we learn about God, and when we do, we learn about ourselves. When we learn about ourselves because we're made in God's image, we actually learn something about God. And that refers us back to Him. And we learn something about Him, and we learn more about ourselves, and on it goes. And these two questions of who is God and who am I are the questions of life. Listen to Calvin. Our wisdom, insofar as it ought to be deemed true and solid wisdom, consists almost entirely of two parts: the knowledge of God and the knowledge of ourselves. We cannot understand anything else unless we understand God. And when we understand God, we can understand the second most important thing, who we are, and then everything else, from our vocations to our marriages to our families to the amazing Shanghai dinner that we had tonight. It all becomes something we see in light of God as the Creator, and not just as a dinner or a cup of coffee or a marriage or a family or a church. It's now seen in light of God as Creator. And that's thrilling, to find out what we need to know about God and need to know about ourselves puts everything else in its proper perspective. And Genesis gives us this origin theme. This story of creation, sin, and redemption that is the story of the Bible. It tells us who God is. If you were to read through the entire book of Genesis, entire chapter of Genesis 1:1, you would see that the word Elohim, translated God, occurs 35 times in Genesis 1. There are only 31 verses in Genesis 1. And God appears 35 times in Genesis 1. It's all about God. Right off the bat, we start with God, and we are flooded with who He is, and that sets the pace, gives us the theme for the rest of the Bible. It's all about God. And that's what we need to go looking for. So when we read the Bible, we look for God's amazing redemptive work, drawing people back to Himself through His work through the Son, but it's all about God. Even what I just said is all about God. And so we find out who He is. We find out that right off the bat, He's the Creator. Have you ever thought about how important it is the Bible starts the way it does? He's the Creator of everything that exists. In the beginning, God. It doesn't argue for His existence, it assumes His existence. The Bible actually says that the fool says in his heart there's no God. In the beginning, God created. The first thing we learn about God is that He is the Creator, and then we are created. We owe everything to God. Our very existence, every molecule, every cell, every atom, every breath, every heartbeat, every brainwave, everything owes its existence and sustenance, ongoing existence, to God. He's the author of everything. Sometimes I think if we could just get Genesis 1:1 really internalized, everything else would fall into place. If a man really believed that God is the creator of the heavens and earth and he has no independent existence, he would never cheat on his wife. If he really believed that. When we really see God as the creator and the author of everything, everything else falls into place. I think if we just got Genesis 1:1 right, we would then see everything else rightly. And in some ways, everything that goes wrong when we don't get Genesis 1:1 right down in our minds and in our hearts. And so in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth is how this starts. And when we think of God in this way, we realize he's eternal. He was before time began in creation. He's the sustainer. The first thing we learn about God is he's the one who creates and keeps everything going. He's the sustainer and creator of the entire universe, the heavens and the earth. Everything that exists is from him. He brings form to formlessness. It was without form and void, and he brings form to it. He brings form to formlessness. He brings light to darkness. Over the face of the deep, let there be light, is what he says. And the Spirit of God is at work in creation. And as Genesis unfolds, we also see that God is personal and relational, and he's the sovereign king, and he has authority over everything, and he's holy, and he's self-revealing, and he speaks to us. And we see his goodness and his wonder and his awe is all around us. Listen to how this begins. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Genesis 1:1. Now, the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning the first day. And God said, "Let there be a vault between the waters to separate the water from the water." So God made the vault and separated the water under the vault from the water above, and it was so. And God called the vault sky, and there was evening, and there was morning the second day. And God said, "Let the water under the sky be gathered to one place, and let dry ground appear." And it was so. And God called the dry ground land, and gathered waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. And God said, "Let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants, and trees on the land that bear fruit with seed in it, according to their various kinds." And it was so. The land produced vegetation, plants bearing seed according to their kinds, and trees bearing fruit with seed according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning, the third day. And on the story goes in this beautiful description of God creating everything that is. We see the goodness of God in all of this. And so we need to spend our lives in wonder and awe, considering who it is that made all the things we see around us. And he does it for our good and for our pleasure. I really believe that boredom is a sin. That's a controversial statement, I know. I think I'm the only person who's ever actually said that I know of. But I do. I think boredom's a sin. When my children come to me and say, "Daddy, I'm bored," I say, "Well, then repent." I do. I say that. Am I a horrible father? No, I'm a theologian. And so I say repent, because if you're bored with the world, my dear, the problem is not with the world. It's with you. You somehow are not seeing the wonders of God everywhere you turn your eye. We've got to be in awe of the world. Christians should be the most curious, amazed people on the planet. Because we don't just explain everything by mere scientific explanations. We see it all the creation of a good God who made it for our good and for our enjoyment. Have you ever thought about trees that are so big they take your breath away? Have any of you been to the redwoods or the sequoias? Oh, yes. Oh, if you haven't gone, please go. Please go and visit the largest living things on earth. Not far from here, just 5-6 hours from here. You can be in front of the largest living things on earth. And we need to do that. You can feel big in the suburbs. You can feel big driving around in an SUV in the city. You can feel big. But when you get in front of a giant sequoia tree, you don't feel big anymore. And that's a really good way to feel, small. And all around us is something to be in awe of. I remember the first time I took my kids to see the giant sequoias. We're standing in front of the General Sherman tree. And my daughter Caroline has always been fascinated by chipmunks. And I bring Caroline and Paige to the General Sherman tree, and I say, look, kids, look up there. It's bigger than skyscrapers. And they were obsessed with this chipmunk. They were chasing it around, and Daddy, look at this chipmunk. And I'm like, I was so upset that they weren't looking at this giant General Sherman tree. And then I thought, well, wait, maybe I'm the one with the problem. Maybe I need to value a chipmunk more, you know? They just seem like these disposable rodents to me. But no, there's something to marvel at in a chipmunk. Giant sequoia trees and redwood trees. Mountains that create their own weather. My wife and I and friends have done a lot of mountain climbing and hiking and backpacking. When you're on a mountain, it creates its own weather. I mean, it just creates storms. They don't need to roll in from the ocean. The mountain just creates it because of where it is and what it does. That's an awesome thing. I actually think one of the reasons there's so much decadence and shallowness in Southern California is because nothing dies every year. It's good to live in places where every year everything dies. I lived 28 years in New England and 7 in Chicago, where every year, everything outside is dead. Here, it's perpetual life. Now, it's all irrigation, so it's just fake, right? It's fake life, but it never dies, right? And so it does something in your soul. The other thing is, the weather here is just so nice all the time. So nice. When I moved here, I couldn't believe how Southern Californians were so incredibly wimpy. There was like this 15 degree allowance for what the temperature could be like. And if it got over, say, 81 or under 70, I don't deserve this. This is horrible. Who did? But there's something about running to get inside, to hide from what's happening outside, right? Occasionally we'll have a good old mudslide or earthquake, or a fire. But man, when you live in a place where every day the weather makes you feel small, that's good. It puts things in its proper perspective. But mountains that create their own weather. Have you ever seen glaciers that are miles long? Miles. They're miles long. We stood and watched glaciers calving in Alaska. Has anyone seen glaciers just dropping off big hunks the size of your home in the water, and then this little tidal wave is caused by a hunk of ice coming off a glacier? It's an awesome thing to see. Have you seen evergreen trees with snow on them and blue skies behind them? Think about the God who came up with that idea. My wife sees that scene in particular. Is probably nothing my wife loves more in nature than an evergreen tree with snow on it with a blue sky behind it. Ever since we moved away from where you see that a lot, she cries every time she sees that. Have you ever thought about daisies, daffodils, and tulips? My wife loves tulips. Tulips are an amazing thing. Do you know Shakespeare said, if there were no other reason to believe in God, a rose would be sufficient. Just one rose should do the trick to believe in God. Think about the amount of daisies, daffodils, and tulips. One would have been amazing. We could pick it, somehow preserve it, and put it in a museum. But God, it causes daisies, daffodils, and tulips to explode every spring all over the world. Do you know how many kinds of flowers there are? Anybody want to guess? How many kinds of flowers there are? What do you think, sweetie? How many? 1 million? Wouldn't that be great? If there were 1 million. I love how you're thinking. There's another guess. Yes, sir. What do you think? 300? Well, we've got a spectrum here. We've got a spectrum. Yeah, there are 400,000 kinds of flowers. What sort of God makes 400,000 kinds of flowers? Really, if he just said, tulips should do the trick. You should just be so thrilled with a tulip. But I remember we were living in Cambridge, and it just seems like winters there are more cold for some reason. It's damp, and we lived there through a winter, and we drove by this field every day when we lived in Cambridge. And it was just this desolate field, and I will never forget one April morning, we turned the corner that we drove down every day and drove down this road where this field was, and it had exploded with tulips. Thousands of them. And I thought, God, what must you be like to be the God who does that and makes 400,000 kinds of flowers? That's just astounding. Have you ever thought about the fact that there are 10 billion galaxies in the observable universe? 10,000 galaxies. The number of stars in a galaxy varies, but assuming an average of 10 billion stars per galaxy means that there are about 1 billion trillion stars in the observable universe. 1 billion trillion stars in the observable universe. And when I say observable, those that we can see through telescopes, the biggest telescopes there are. Look, we've got to see God in light of this creation He's made. So from the universe to the cell, have you studied a cell? Have any of you kids studied a cell in biology? Isn't it incredible? There's a little city in there. There's a little city more complex than human cities in one cell. And we didn't even know about that till relatively recently in human history. We didn't even know about this awesome thing called a cell. One of my good friends, Jason Tresser at Biola, who's a leader in our church, he's a cellular biologist. And I say to him, when he tells me about a cell, it wouldn't surprise me at all if I walked by your biology class and just all the students were on their faces worshiping God. Because you're just thinking about the cell for 15 minutes, and then we're overtaken by an overwhelming sense of worship. Just the cell is enough to be in awe of God. One of my favorite things God ever created were taste buds. Have you ever thought about taste buds? Taste buds are awesome. And I don't throw that word awesome around much. I really don't. I'm not like the young folks. I want to preserve that one for stuff that really makes me go, oh, taste buds. Have you ever thought about taste buds? First of all, God says, I'm going to make taste. I'm going to make sweet and savory and bitter and sweet and umami. And I'm going to, we just discovered that one really when Japanese cuisine started to become more prevalent and we started thinking about it. And these combinations of these flavors. And that your tongue has food on it. And the enzymes roll around in your taste buds. Let me read some statistics to you. Do you know you're typically born with 10,000 taste buds. By the time you're my age, you've lost more than half. Talk about a source to be sad over. It makes me really, that's why older people put more spices on, give me the salt, because I got to taste this, right? So, 10,000 taste buds. And we just discovered umami in 1985, I guess it became a category of taste. But there are 40 million olfactory receptors that work with your taste buds that absorb these flavors and the combinations of these flavors and send the message to your brain, and you say, oh, that's sweet. I mean, Pastor Daniel, just at a meal, he said, this food we've been eating tonight, it'll have a sweetness to it occasionally. Like these, we ate the best bao I've ever had in my life tonight, just down the road. Do you realize how blessed you are? Yes. And there was a sweetness to it. It wasn't just salty. There was a sweetness to it. And to really appreciate, I had lunch at a great barbecue today with a dear brother, and he said, I don't really like eating much. Food's just fuel for me. It's just something I do to get it over with. And I said, I thought you said you were a Christian. I did. I said that to him. He was like, what? I said, no, we got to fix this problem. Like, you and I need to hang out more. Because have you ever just thought about taste buds? It's just incredible that they send these messages to your brain when you're tasting something. Don't ever eat a meal or drink some boba. That's our dog's name. It is. Our dog's name is Boba. I got 3 kids from Taiwan. That's where it was invented, And so you got to have a dog named Boba. Boba. It's just, who would think of that? Well, Taiwanese apparently. And when you eat or drink something, worship God. I'm really, even in a little way, turn everything, whatever you do, whether eating or drinking, do it all to the glory of God. So we need to learn to be worshipful in our eating, worshipful in our enjoyment of all the blessings He's given us in this world. Just don't get me going on music. How about the hand? I destroyed my fingers playing football, and this pinky used to be on a 45-degree angle, and they fused it. I don't even have a knuckle here anymore. And I'm so thankful they could do that. But it's incredible what a machine a pinky is. They can't fix this thing. They just got to fuse it. I have a son who only has 1 foot. And so he's got a prosthetic foot. I think we're on prosthetic foot number 10. Because the most brilliant prosthetists in the world at the Hanger Clinic can only begin to replicate what God made when He made a foot. I mean, have you ever thought about what a foot does? When you just walk around here, never mind walk down different terrain and what your ankle's doing. It's incredible. And having a son with 1 foot has made me appreciate an ankle and a foot in a fresh and new way. And one of the things I love most is learning about things that humans, for most of human history, were clueless about that are awesome. Like the cell. Has anybody ever seen this? Do you guys know what? Let me go here. I want to show you this. Sorry. Oh, have anybody ever seen that? You know what that is? That is a red ruby sea dragon. It was found. We didn't even know this thing existed. Look at it. How cool is that? We didn't even know it existed until 2007. We found it off the coast of Australia. For millennia, no one has been enjoying a red ruby sea dragon except for God, who made it. He's just been enjoying it for thousands of years before we even knew it existed. It's an amazing thing to think about these things God made. He's the creator of everything. Look at that. You can know the God who made that. And so when we think about God for who He is in light of all this incredible creation He's made, we worship. We realize He's the only true God. When you think about God as the creator of everything else that is, it puts Him in a completely different category all by Himself. All by Himself. All the gods of the peoples are worthless idols, but the Lord made the heavens. Over and over again in the Bible, the thing that distinguishes God from all the fake gods, all the so-called gods, all the idols, all the inventions of human beings, is the fact that he made everything, even the stuff those idols are made out of. He made the heavens. And look what Paul says to the people in Lystra in Acts 14. Men, why are you doing these things? We're also men of the same nature as you. And you know what they were doing? They were worshiping Paul and Barnabas because they had done miracles, healed people. And so the people were offering sacrifices and worshiping Paul and Barnabas and calling them Zeus and Hermes. And they tear their clothing and say, no, why are you doing these things? We are also men of the same nature as you, and preach the gospel to you that you should turn from these vain things to a living God. And what distinguishes him from all the vain things? Who made the heaven and the earth and the sea and all that is in them. See, he's the creator of everything that is. And he made us. And Jesus believes what we're saying tonight. Jesus believes Genesis 1:1 in the creation account. And it's fascinating. There's so much packed into this one verse. In this verse, we have Jesus' understanding of Scripture. We have Jesus' understanding of creation. We have Jesus' understanding of male and female. We have Jesus' understanding of marriage, all loaded right into this verse. But when he's asked a question about divorce, he goes right back to Genesis 1 and says, have you not heard? Have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female? Jesus taught about creation. Jesus believed in creation. And he's there at creation as creator God. By him all things were created, both in the heavens and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things have been created through him and for him. Jesus is creator God. That's why when people say, well, you can worship Jesus along with any other religion or any other religious leader, they miss this fundamental truth about Christ, that he's the creator. He created Muhammad. He created the Buddha. He created Gandhi. He created Oprah. All these religious leaders that people worship, he made them. They owe their existence to him. Look at John 1. Do you realize that John 1 actually chronologically occurs before Genesis 1? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything that was made. In him was life, and life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Jesus was there at the beginning with the Father and the Spirit that we saw hovering over the waters there in the beginning. And when you see God as creator, worship has got to be what happens. Arise, bless the Lord your God forever and ever. Oh, may your glorious name be blessed and exalted above all blessing and praise. You alone are the Lord. You have made the heavens, the heaven of heavens, with all their hosts, the earth and all that is in it, and the seas and all that is in them. And here's the response. You give life to all of them, and the heavenly hosts bow down before you. Bless the Lord. The heavenly hosts bow down before you, because you're the creator God. We worship God. It's the only proper response to understanding him as creator. Oh, come, let us worship him. You all remember this old praise chorus? It was really popular for a long time, but I sang this for a couple decades before I ever really paused and said, what is the source of the praise in this praise chorus? You remember what I'm talking about? Oh, come let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord our God, our Maker. He's our Maker. Yes. He's the one who made us. So of course we worship and bow down before him. And he made us. We owe our existence to him. It's not just the ruby red sea dragon that owes its existence to him. It's us. God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female he created them. God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning the sixth day. That is a beautiful picture of who we are, made by God, in God's image, for him, for relationship with him, and we're part of his very good creation. There is so much loaded into these verses that answer so many of the questions people are plagued to understand these days, from the purpose of humanity, the origin of humanity, the origin and purpose of sexuality, what we are intended to be, male and female here, the very goodness of creation, although marred by the fall. It's all here. It floods our lives with meaning when we understand this creation account the way we should. I was not a good student in high school. This is not an excuse. None of you young people use this as an excuse of any kind. However, I never missed school. I love school, but just not the academic part of it. And everybody would say, Eric, you're never going to get into college. And I said, somebody will let me in. And they said, well, you won't survive. And I said, well, I can work. I'll figure it out. And I barely got into college. I was on academic probation my first day. Can you imagine doing that to a freshman? Your first day, welcome to college. You're on probation. And I had to take caveman math. No credit caveman math. And I was learning to learn as a freshman and as a sophomore. I wasn't just learning content, I was learning to learn. And one of the best things that ever happened to me in my whole life was taking Biology 110 with Dr. Toby Scheinblum. She was in her early 60s, I think. She was about 4'10", early 60s. She walked in the first day of class to a lecture hall of 70 students. I remember very well, she had black boots on up to her knee, had a skirt on. She walked in with a stack of papers and handed out a piece of paper to every one of the 70 students in this lecture hall. And she said, I'm giving you these pieces of paper, which are drop slips, because biology is my life. And most of you are taking Biology 110 simply to fulfill a requirement to get graduation done and get a job at Aetna Life and Casualty there in Connecticut, the insurance capital of the world, and get a job at Aetna. This is exactly what she said. Get a job at Aetna Life and Casualty, and you don't really care about biology. But like I said, biology is my life, so most of you will not be able to handle this course the way I teach it. So I thought I'd save you the time of going to the registrar and just give you the drop slip now so you can fill it out and submit it today. I got to tell you, this football player, college football player who had never studied, heard that lady say that, and I almost stood up and said, let's see what you got, lady. Bring it on. She was speaking my language. That's how I wanted it to be. And I got so into biology, I'll never forget it. I said, I'm going to do whatever it takes to learn as well as I possibly can in here. And I just took copious notes, and I would rewrite them before I went to bed every night. And I was learning about my body, human biology, and I was in awe of what I was learning every day. And I was learning about the cell. I was learning about all these things. The final exam in Scheinblum's Biology 110 class was trace an energy cell from the sun to the toilet, includes diagrams. Which meant, all of it, photosynthesis and the digestive system, the reproductive system, the circulatory system, all of it. We had to understand all these things. I was filling out blue books like crazy, throwing them over. I got so into biology. This is how much I got into biology. When I was in college, I had a motorcycle. And I was dating Donna, who became my wife, when I was in college. And I was so into biology that Donna had a dream one night that she was walking on campus, and I rode by on my motorcycle, And riding on the back of my motorcycle was Dr. Scheinblum. My biology teacher was on the back of my motorcycle. That's how into biology I was. And she was more excited when I got an A in that class than I was. I found out later she was actually on probation by the university for flunking 80% of her students. In our class, down to 17. But let me tell you the reason not only that I survived, but I thrived in there. I felt like I had a completely unfair advantage because I was a Christian. And when I learned about the cell, when I learned about the heart, I'll never forget, it was like a worship experience for me. I had this unfair advantage that this wasn't just academic. This was worship. This was theology. This was learning about my Creator. Now, one day in class, she said, do you know there's something in the heart called the sinoatrial node, and it is what emits the electrical impulse that causes the heart to beat. And do you know biologists really have no idea what the source of that electrical impulse is? I didn't do it. I wish I had. I wish I had said what I wanted to in that moment. I know the source. Can we all get on our faces right now and worship the source? And it was worshipful for me. I don't know of any of the other 17 that remained who were believers. They didn't give any evidence of it, but it was worship for me. And so it's not just learning about God and being in awe of creation. It's being in awe of creation and learning about God. But then when you see God as the Creator, you worship Him and you fear Him and you obey Him and you live for Him. You don't fit Him into your life in the midst of all the other things. He is your life. He's the source of it. He's everything. He really does deserve all the glory, all the worship, all the praise. If we could just get Genesis 1:1 down, everything else will be fine.